Yeah. Rappers try to brag about accomplishments, but nothing you've been dropping yet astonishes.
What is up, everybody? Vertical Smile here, and today I'm bringing you guys the 5 tips that I found most valuable to me when building my first computer. Now, this isn't going to be a direct how-to guide. This is going to be more of finding the right parts for you, making sure you get the best deal, saving you money, saving you time, and saving you heartache. So without further ado, let's get into it. Tip number 1, salvage what you can. Based on the fact that you want to build a PC, there's a 95% chance you already have some sort of computer that you're replacing it with. Now, what you want to do, very first thing, look up the specs on your current computer. Look up what it has, how much RAM, what kind of RAM, what's the speed, find out how big the hard drive is, etc., etc. Find out what you have so you can reuse those parts. For me, when I built my computer, I actually kept my disk drive and disk burner, my hard drive, and my RAM. So that's 16 gigs of RAM, a hard drive, and a disc burner DVD player. That right there already is about $200, $250 I already saved. I hadn't even purchased anything yet. So that's my number 1 tip. Make sure you salvage what you can out of your computer before you move on and replace them. Now that you guys know what parts you need to replace, now comes time to research. And that's my second tip. And seriously, it is one of the most important things you can do, is research. I spent somewhere in the range of 6 to 7 hours on Newegg and other sites comparing and contrasting parts and their performance and, and all of that, making sure they work. And that is very important. Seriously, if you do not do that and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to end up with either a really good CPU or a really bad GPU or just something that is bad, and it won't work as well. You're going to spend a lot of money on one part and spend less on the other parts and not realize that it's actually hurting your computer. You can buy 2 mid-range parts that work well together. Like for me, I have a 770 Ti that is from NVIDIA, and I also have an i5 3570K from Intel. Those 2 brands work very well together, and they get very good performance. If I were to buy a GTX Titan and kept my AMD CPU for my old computer, I wouldn't have had near the performance. I would have horrible bottlenecking, and it just wouldn't have worked. And seriously, this is what I consider a mid-range computer, mid-range setup. And I'm running GTA 5 on high to ultra settings. Yeah, there's a couple mediums in there, but those are just the big ones. But the rest of them are high or ultra. And I'm recording at 1080p, and I'm still running good frame rates. I'm not lagging. I'm not anything. I'm not stuttering or anything. I'm running perfectly. You're watching it in the background right here. So it doesn't necessarily matter if your budget's $800 or $5,000. You can still game and have a lot of fun and have it look really good, and you just don't have to spend as much as long as you do your research and know what you're getting. So that's very, very important. My third tip has a lot to do with the second tip, and it has to do with research. Know what you're getting. That is very, very important. I'll give you an example. You go out and you buy a really sick motherboard, a really good CPU, and a really good GPU. That's great. But then you get them and you find out that they don't even fit in your tower. And why is that? That's because motherboards have different sizes. There's like a mini ATX, a micro ATX, and an ATX board. There are some others, but those are really the main ones, the micro ATX and the ATX. Now, I went from a micro ATX to an ATX, so I actually had to go buy a new tower to accommodate that. Same thing with a GPU. If your computer comes with a small GPU and you go out and buy a really big GPU, it may not have the space to operate or the space to get good airflow, at which point you're just going to burn it up and ruin it anyway. So make sure you understand what you're getting and what you need to replace to accommodate that. It is very, very important. It will tell you, if you look up the specs of the computer you already own, if it can fit an ATX motherboard, or you can just disassemble it yourself and look at it. There's an actual, you can look up size diagrams on the motherboards and everything, and you can measure by hand, and you can pretty much figure out. If it's pretty close, it's probably going to fit. There's usually not that much leeway, or there's usually not that little leeway on there. There's usually, it's either a yes or a no. It's never, wow, that was really close. At least for me, I've never experienced that. I've never seen anybody experience that. I'm sure it's happened, but for the most part, it's either not going to fit or it is going to fit. You won't really have too much question regarding that. Tip number 4, very simple. Do not overspend on stupid shit. Most of us were not super wealthy. We actually have a budget, like a hard budget, not a soft budget where you can go over a little bit and be like, oh, whatever. We have a hard budget. I had a budget of $1,000 for my computer, and I made sure I stayed under that. The way I did that was buying stuff on sale and sticking to parts I knew I could afford. So I bought a $300 GPU to make sure that I could afford everything else. I actually came in under budget. I only spent like $700 on my computer. And again, it runs everything 1080p, pretty good settings. It looks really good. And I can run 60, 80, 100 frames or 150 frames in some games and not even have a problem. Not a problem. I can go on ultra settings. I can play Arma 3, and if anybody plays Arma 3, they know how taxing that game is on your system. It's very, very intensive on the CPU especially. And I can run that game 60, 70 frames online. So, I mean, this may not be the best system, but for $700, it's going to be hard to beat that, in my opinion. So like I said, do not overspend on dumb shit. Do not buy a $1,000 graphics card if your budget's $1,400. Do not do that. All you're going to end up with, like I was talking about earlier, is bottlenecking. And to give you clarification, if this makes sense at all, bottlenecking, if you imagine an old glass Coke bottle where it's really wide at the bottom and it gets really narrow at the top, if you imagine the top as your CPU and the bottom as your GPU and you're pouring out of it, you can only pour so much out. You send so much information from the bottom, only so much can get through the top. And that's what it's like on a computer. That's bottlenecking. That's why they call it that. You can only get so much information through a CPU, and if your GPU can send more information and your computer can send more information than that CPU can process, you're not going to get the performance you want, and you're going to end up with a worse computer and still have paid more. And then you're going to be wondering why that's the problem, and then you're going to have to go back and buy a new CPU and another motherboard, most likely, and it doesn't get you anywhere. So just know what you're doing beforehand and make sure you buy good parts that will work well together. I will say that again and again. Research, research, research which parts work well together. Now, my final tip does have to do with the actual hardware and building of the PC. Now, this is how I learned, and I built my computer first try, no mistakes, simply by watching YouTube videos. There's a guy, Linus Tech Tips. Look him up. I will leave a link to his YouTube page in my description. He builds computers. He tells you everything. He does product reviews. Go watch him. I've probably watched 50 of his videos just in the time I was looking to build my PC and get certain parts. He will help you. There are other YouTubers especially as well. They will show you how to build a computer. They'll give you the do's and do nots. And 30 minutes after you watch, or through the watching of that video, so after 30 minutes and that video is over, you basically know how to do it. And while you're building your computer, you can also watch it. But whatever you do, do not go in to a build not knowing what to do. Now, I will say, from learning, it is all really plug and play. It is like hooking up an Xbox with 40 cords rather than 2 or 3. That's really all it is. It's just making sure stuff goes in the right spot so it works. I mean, there's really only one way anything fits anyway, so you really can't mess it up. But there's just certain things you don't want to do. You don't want to touch your motherboard. You don't want to break the pin connectors on the bottom of your CPU. Those are those little prong things that stick out of the bottom. There's usually about 1,200 of them. You break a couple off, your CPU is useless. Really. It can't transmit as much information, and I don't even think it would work, to be honest with you. But it might. So, those are my 5 tips. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if this helped. And as always, thank you so much for watching.
Yeah. Rappers try to brag about accomplishments, but nothing you've been dropping yet astonishes.